This is going to be a rather strange video overall. The basis of what this comes from is from Clarence Kennedy talking about why he is against anti doping and his reasons for why. And this is referring to his points made at the end of his part 2 on the subject. In both videos, Clarence does a remarkably good job at staying neutral in a lot of senses. When he sees the flaw in his own argument, he addresses it and talks about it instead of just pretending it's not a thing or hiding the truth to back his own argument, which is quite commendable considering most people don't do that, especially referring to this kind of topic. Clarence basically sits at a point in this video where he says that anti doping doesn't actually work and it actually creates bigger issues overall, and those are worse issues than having anti doping. Makes the point multiple times that the way the current system is, it doesn't work, it's not efficient, it's corrupt, it causes athletes to take worse drugs, it demonizes PEDs, and it just creates this whole pretty much system of lies. And on top of those system of lies, one of the bigger issues as well is that it's just not the reality, and there's just so much corruption on the underworks and underlaying of it in the rafters of it. And I agree with all of that. I think it's hard not to, especially because it's factual. There's so many different points where this has been proven, so many different scandals, so many different issues, and you really have to be living in a magical little world to believe that top level athletes are not taking some form of PEDs. Now, I think for me to address everything I would want to from this video, like part 2 alone, not both parts, I would have to sit here for about 4 or 5 hours on a video to fully go through it all, because it's such a never-ending topic, and there's so many points made, and there's so many great points made. There's a lot of points I disagree with and agree with, but it's certainly at no point whatsoever a yes or a no answer. None of this is black and white. All of it has a counter argument and a counter argument to that, and so on and so on. Overall, though, I would like to say that I don't disagree or agree with him on this. I don't think it's as simple as it would be better without, and I don't think it's as simple as it's better currently with what we have. I think the current system's incredibly bad, and I think removing it would, in a sense, be better. But I think the better outcome in general is working on removing the corruption and making the system better. I think that is the better outcome for the athletes, for the people running it, and for the general public. But what I plan on doing is addressing the 7 points he makes at the end. These are the things that Clarence addresses as being the things right now that he believes are possible and can be encouraged. So, first off, is anti doping programs and the public should stop demonizing PEDs. And he's completely correct. They really should. I feel like a lot of the hate towards them and the issues towards them comes from that negative stigma, where a lot of it's not factual. From studying this kind of information at university and seeing it on a much grander scale, and even just looking at academic papers, although even academic papers can be built towards making your own outcome, it really is apparent that they're nowhere near as bad as people make them out to be. Especially the basic things that most people, if they take, do take. And what you'll see from an Instagram comment section to a public forum is whenever there's someone who's clearly on steroids, the comment sections are putting emojis in saying, the little blood one, or going, oh, it doesn't count, he's on steroids, or oh, steroid junkie, look at you. And you get a lot of stuff like that towards people that are on. And that's one of the biggest issues, is there's this massive amount of hate towards it. And there's this massive amount of, it doesn't count because you took. But the ironic thing is their favourite athlete takes as well. I can understand the demonization of steroids in steroid-tested sports. I can understand that. There's some logic to that. I don't agree with it. I don't think it should be as much demonized as it should be maybe looked down on, but it certainly has way too harsh a view on it. But the view that people have on the public taking is beyond me. People get really angry in some sense of just normal people taking it, saying that they just can't be bothered putting the work in, they're cheating, they don't put the effort in, it's laziness, so on, so on. These terms are thrown at these kind of people, or it doesn't count because they're on steroids. And there's almost no need for it, especially when it's not in sport, because that individual's choice of what they want to do with their body and their life. and they shouldn't be criticized or demonized or attacked for those choices. That's where I see the demonization of PEDs being the biggest problem, is people get attacked individually for it. People get slandered, people get made fun of, and at the end of the day, it's their body and they should be allowed to make that choice by themselves. And it shouldn't be a reason for slander. So Clarence's second point is anti-doping and the public should be more honest about PED use in sports and explain the realities of it so people can make informed decisions. This is extremely on point, and there's just no way you can disagree with this. Even if you dislike the idea of PEDs, especially when you're talking about people taking it in the public and people just taking it in the public eye, it should be that individual's choice, and they should be presented with neutral information from both sides. Just as if you were in a school, teachers are not meant to show a political bias. If you have a modern studies or a politics teacher, they're not allowed to tell you what they support. And I almost think it should be the same in this situation. They shouldn't have someone who's on one side. There shouldn't be anyone that is leaning heavily one way or the other. This should just be like a school situation when it comes to things like that politics class you might have had if you remember it. And when you have those situations, it allows you to see things from your own neutral point of view and allows you to build your own opinion around that. And that's what more people should be allowed to do, because at the end of the day, it should be your choice, especially if you're not in that competitive sport environment where these things are illegal. The other thing is that a lot of information about PEDs is spread around falsely and isn't true. There's tons of false realities to what is said to people. And at the bare minimum, they should be getting told the actual truth about these things. His next point, point 3, is probably the one I have the biggest issue with, which was people and parents in particular should discourage children from high-level sports. And this I massively disagree with, on multiple levels. So this is probably what I'll go down into depth, maybe a bit more. So in Clarence's first point, he talks about the demonization of PEDs. And he talks about, in his second point, how the PEDs in sport should be more explained and the realities of it, and people should just be informed and allowed to make their own decisions. So in point 3, he then says people and parents in particular should discourage children from high-level sport. But it kind of contradicts the first 2 points, which is about how demonizing something is, the basics of which is demonizing something is wrong. People should be given both sides and be allowed to make their own choice. And that's what I believe is more better. And I don't know, I have a huge question. I think that's probably more what he meant and didn't word it correctly. Is the reality of this situation is that, yes, I agree in a lot of senses, kids should be warned of high-level sport, but not discouraged. They should be given equal choice, just like in your previous one where you talk about the realities of it. They should be told what is good and bad about high-level sport, whereas the problem we have, in my opinion, is that just the goods are pushed and not the bad. And you see it all the time, kids fall off with no qualifications or they get injured, and all of a sudden they don't have the career they might have had, and they also don't have the qualifications for a job and issues like that. To mention the huge anxiety, depression, mental health problems people get from sport, the pressure that causes on your body, the injuries you have. Individually, I've torn a hamstring, torn both, broken both wrists, had several issues, had concussions, and if you told me it all at the start, I probably wouldn't have done it. But looking back on it, there is no other thing I would like to have done with my life. I don't really think that what Clarence meant is how that sounds. I think what he was more leaning towards is that they just shouldn't be pushed forward into high-level sport as much as they are. I feel like if I said this to him, I think he'd probably agree in a sense that them being given both options is probably the most valuable way of doing it. Because there definitely is an issue with high-level sport being pushed upon children to a high level. So point 4 very much aligns with point 3, and it's as a society we should stop glorifying high-level sport. And this one's interesting to me because I agree with this but yet disagree. I think in a lot of ways high-level sport is extremely good. It creates good idols for children and often gives them heroes to look up to. It doesn't take you far to look at people like Cristiano Ronaldo, Lionel Messi. In America, you have people like LeBron James, Michael Jordan, Kobe Bryant. All people that push good ideals and set a good example. And don't get me wrong, there's bad examples. Like, it doesn't take you far to look either. You know, when you look in things like MMA, you have guys like Conor McGregor who talk back. They're rude. They're horrible. They've made comments about people's religions. If you go into the NFL, you have guys that were major drug addicts and were open about it, or were hitting people and not obeying the rules, and all of that should not be glorified, which I feel like it is, and it's looked on almost in a sense of being cool. I think what we need to stop doing is treating athletes in high level sport as something more than humans, because in my opinion, these people get looked off not as gods, but they don't get put on the same plane as the rest of us, which they still are, and they get excused for doing ridiculous things, and that's just a regular occurrence in the sporting world. It seems to be becoming an ongoing joke that NFL athletes will get a larger sentence for testing positive for a steroid than they will for beating a woman, or for a racial abuse incident, or a rape issue, or sexual assault. All those things seem to get less sentence time at this rate than they do for illegal issues when it comes to drug abuse. So to kind of like sum up what I'm saying on this point, because I definitely feel like I've rambled on this more than I should have. As a society, should we stop glorifying high level sport? No. But what we should start doing is glorifying the right people instead of glorifying the overall conglomerate. That is how I overall view this. Clarence's fifth point is create an untested federation for sports. And he puts in brackets, huge discussion, but I think could be a net positive. And I agree with this to a large portion. I think the problem is that it just wouldn't work. Like, I think it has a possibility to work in some senses, and for certain sports. But I think he addresses more talking about weightlifting and general strength sports, like powerlifting, strongman, CrossFit, all these kind of things. Because if you had this in, let's say, American football, basketball, baseball, just like the three big American ones, it just wouldn't work. The dominant leagues are the NFL, the NBA, and the MLB, and that'll never change. Then let's say you take football and you then look at the Barclays Premier League. You get a steroid tested version of that. No one's playing in it. Like, this is the problem with the idea, at least in team sports. You just wouldn't get it. It would never transfer correctly. People wouldn't care to watch it. They would not have as talented athletes. Why would someone want to play in that league over this league? But the more place it's interesting is definitely in strength sports. So, for example, strongman is untested. It is the steroid one. It is the main focus around taking PEDs and taking everything you can to beat the man next to you. And I actually love that about it. I think it makes it so much better when it comes to you are literally seeing the peak of what a human can be. There is actually tested leagues for strongman. Obviously nowhere near to the same public care, if you will, or public want to watch. But there is tested federations, and there is still some stuff there, even though it isn't big. And even on top of that, when you look aside from that, in powerlifting, obviously you have the IPF, and you've got these top class athletes in that sport. And then you've got your non-tested federations, which are all over, and you even get into equipped. I think there already is enough untested federations for sports. I don't think there's another sport I can think of that would benefit from it, especially because the realism is that every sport takes steroids already. All these top athletes do. American football, NBA, basketball, baseball, football, boxing, MMA, they all take already. Like, that's the realism to some extent. And that's not saying they're, taking stuff on a regular basis, but they are nonetheless getting advantage through these things. In conclusion to this point, I think the main thing is that I just don't think it would be workable. I just think as a whole that wouldn't succeed. And I think where it would succeed, we already have a form of that already. So Clarence's sixth point is harm reduction strategies should be implemented for PED users. And he's 100% correct, it should be. This is something that my understanding of is weaker on, and I will address it less because of that, because I don't want to put more information into a point I don't understand, because I feel like that's just waffling and not actually giving real answers. But He's 100% correct. More support for these people should be there, and more opportunities for these people to get help as well should be there. And I think the counter argument to that is, well, they shouldn't be doing something if it's illegal anyway and it's not allowed. And the answer is, well, yes, in a sense, but people are going to do it anyway, and that's not going to change. So at least the help should still be there for those people, just like help is for people that have tons of issues. I think the problem with this is that, like, people will say, like, oh, well, you shouldn't be doing it. But the realism is people are going to do it anyway, and they're going to need help. And the best thing we can do is just make sure we can provide that help. And I honestly think out of all 7 of the points he makes, if this one could come true, out of the 7, it would probably have the biggest effect. So Clarence's 7th point is untested federations should discourage the use of dangerous PEDs. And I totally agree with this. I think he's more than correct. And I feel like his whole point overall, if I was to oversimplify the 2 episodes he's made and put them into one, which I don't think is even doable, but if I would, what I would say is overall point/conclusion is that the biggest issue is that the way the testing works currently makes athletes do more dangerous more dangerous PEDs, which is the biggest problem. And when you have an untested federation, they don't have to go into these untested, dangerous PEDs as much. And it just it gives you the ability more to stay away from them. Because people are taking these more dangerous ones to win. And that's the problem. You want to be able to take more without being caught. I would even like to add to this point, not just untested federations that disagree to the use of dangerous PEDs, but untested federations should discourage the use of dangerous PEDs and tell people what are the better ones to be taking for their health and precautions around it. And I think would just be outstanding. Overall, I agree with Clarence Kennedy. I think it's hard to disagree with most of the points he makes. There is several issues, and he makes clear examples of it and regularly gives it information to prove it. Very, very, very little of his points are opinionated, and almost all of them have factual basis and bias. When looking at the overall subject, it's a hard one. It's not an easy subject, and he himself addresses that, and you can't pretend it's not. I think my biggest criticism, though, however, would be that he doesn't provide a solution through this. He addresses what he thinks is bad about it, but he doesn't say what he would turn to over it, if you know what I mean, like what system he would rather have. It's much easier to criticize something when you don't have something to compare it to as the next best thing. It's very easy to make anything look bad when you can't provide something better to it. At the end of the day, if the engine in your car is bad, and you remove the engine because it's bad, if you don't have another engine to put in, your car is now not going anywhere, whereas at least it was going somewhere before. At the same time, I don't 100% know if he needs to give an example of something better, because at the end of the day, his whole thing is why he individually just does not like anti-doping and doesn't think it should be a thing. Not as such, at the end of the day, the topic and the title of the video is not why I'm against anti-doping and this is how I would solve it. It is just, this is why I don't like anti-doping. I hope to at least someone hearing this, I've made a valuable point here and there. I'm not anybody special, but to me this was something I was really interested to talk about, because there's just so much to talk about with it. And there's so much more points I can make and so much more depth I could go into, but just like Clarence says in his video, if he addressed every point, it'd be a 5-hour video. And I wanted to address these 7 points because I feel like they're probably the 7 most important, if I'm honest. Because I feel like the most important things is how we improve things and not just how we discourage things. And if you have somehow made it to this part of the video, I greatly appreciate that, because it's amazing knowing that someone listened through. And I would love to hear other people's feedback on this and what other people think around the subject.